ABSL Summit. Transform to thrive.
Well, good morning to you. As I was traveling here from the Netherlands, I was going through my smartphone and all the apps that I leverage to help me get to the next place I want to go. I was looking at downloading my digital boarding pass. I was checking out what were the latest headlines on my Perplexity app to understand the latest news in Poland today. And of course, I was looking at the weather map. And unfortunately, I have not found an app yet to guarantee straight hair. But that said, it made me very curious to think about this augmentation, this transformation that we all go through in leveraging technology. And I wanted to start with a question to you. How will we humans lead the technology? Or is technology going to determine how we navigate humanity? I wonder, as I stand here looking at you, what changes and transformation you are willing to make in order to embrace the eco-digital era. Because you see, it's actually not all that new. It started a few years ago. Technology and innovation have always been the best ways to augment ourselves. And millions of years ago, humans started shaping nature by developing tools that they used for agriculture and war. For thousands of years, the only incremental innovation has been upgrading these tools from bones and stones to iron. And in fact, these tools were being used to help us be stronger, to go faster, to achieve things that we never thought were possible to do on our own. It wasn't until around the year 4000 BC that the wheel was discovered, and this gave birth to transportation that enabled us to go farther. Tools were made for early machinery, which developed into the following 20 centuries. This was until about the 15th century, when the printing changed the game and introduced a culture of knowledge sharing and speeding up the innovation process. In the 19th century, we had three key technologies: steam machinery, electricity, and the telephone, that changed the game and gave birth to the Industrial Revolution, transforming our environment, our cities, our businesses, and society forever. There are many practical inventions that have emerged based on the observations and the experiences that real people have had out and about in the world doing their daily things. And we've learned how to augment our ways of being in using these tools. These three in particular fascinated me. If you consider that in the 1812, there was a saw developed by Tabitha, who was observing her husband and son using a straight-edge saw, trying to cut a piece of wood in a very inefficient process. And so she developed the circular saw. The flat-bottom paper bag was developed by Margaret Knight, who was working in a paper bag factory. And the paper bags that were developed at that time had a pointed bottom. And once you put 2 apples in that bag, the seam would burst. And she thought, why can't we make the bottom flat so we could store more in the bag, enabling her to take a whole bushel of apples in her bag. And probably relevant to today and the weather prediction that I saw on my app, I'm grateful for Mary Anderson, because she was en route looking at a trolley driver in the middle of a blizzard. And that trolley driver had to stop the trolley every few meters. And he would hang out the window and he would go like this, thus inventing the windshield wiper. Something we can all be glad for in today's current day, I'm sure. Well, when we look into the 20th century, the modern era, this has really personified across all domains of our experiences, change has become a constant, and innovation is our mindset. From transportation to medicine to electronics and networks, from buoyant pace of innovation has become inherent in our living standards. And although we may think that we've invented pretty much everything that's possible, the 21st century is already reminding us that there's a lot more still to come, a lot more still to be achieved, and the pace is not about to slow down. In fact, we're only speeding up. Everything you see here behind me, from Wi-Fi in homes to the cloud, social networks, smartphones and tablets, DNA sequencing, the artificial organs, autonomous vehicles and drones, mobile apps and streaming, none of this existed 20 years ago, and yet it all seems so familiar to us today. But along with this, cloud computing is causing emissions that is greater than all the airplanes flying around the world today. And AI and large language models are only increasing those emissions exponentially. This avalanche of technologies in all domains explains why we can sometimes feel a bit intimidated, I think, when we look at the future. You know, I often find myself in conversations with clients, and they're in one of two places, and sometimes in both. Some of them have FOMO, and the other ones have FOGs. Has anyone heard of FOMO? It's the fear of missing out. And what about FOGs? Have you heard of that one? Probably not, because I made up the acronym, but it stands for the fear of getting started. Where do we start? We have the capacity to solve for large problems, but we lack the capacity to change at large. By now, I'm convinced that if your company hasn't gone digital yet, it will. So we start to look at what we call the dual transition. Capgemini and Harvard teamed up on a beautiful study in looking at what we now call, in fact, the eco-digital era. Eco can stand for economy, it can stand for ecology, and it can stand for the transformation that needs to take place within our businesses today. And as big as the Industrial Revolution that I talked about earlier was at that time, I believe that this is even a bigger time of transformation than humankind has ever experienced. So how do you leverage tech to become a digital company? But not that every company needs to become a tech company. I think that sustainability must be a part of every solution. So consider this and think about this for a moment. When we as a human being experience 1 degree of change in our human body, we start not to feel very well. If it's 1.5 degree, we think we're getting a little bit ill. If it's 2.5 degree, we're thinking of calling the doctor. We may be even in the hospital. So what do you think is happening to the life in the ocean today? The ocean temperature has already risen by 1 degree. We're talking about life. And if we can imagine that 73% of the bacteria in our own body can also be found in the ocean. We have a synergy with ocean life. And this is a huge change for ocean life. The diversity in the ocean, if you look at the bleaching of the corals, the fish that maybe need to swim deeper to cooler temperatures, it is dramatically changing their relationship with our life on Earth. And in fact, life in the ocean is responsible for more than half of the energy on Earth. And as far as that energy is concerned, 3/4 of the energy we use is lost, instead of finding ways for us to store the energy and reuse it. So how do we find solutions for that? We need to be able to move beyond this very limiting mindset that we always say, well, until now, it was always this way. And to shift our mindset to say something more like, well, from now on, this is the way it should be. And determine what types of change we need to make things different, to get the future that we want. What paradigms do you need to challenge and change to create that future that we want? Well, I can tell you there's a lot of uncertainty right now. The way people think about the world has changed. And I really enjoyed listening to the geopolitical conversation that we had on the panel earlier today. Because we have a global economy, but we want economic independence. We don't want to become isolated and raise barriers and build more walls. But there's a balance that's needed between sovereignty and dependency. When you consider the regulation of the digital economy, we see that in the United States, it is a very market-driven economy. In China, it's state-driven. And here in Europe, it's rights-driven. So who has it right? Is European regulation good for innovation? We have a very risk-taking stigma here in Europe. How many innovative European companies come to your mind instantly? Well, although we're rights-driven, we're not very good at regulating and enforcing our laws and policies. In the United States, they're free. However, they're exploiting user privacy. And citizens are complaining that they need more rights and regulations. And they're having a really difficult time doing business within Europe when they encounter GDPR. In China, they have the infrastructure power, and in fact, they are innovating, but they do not have freedom. I believe we need to collaborate, or we will perish. And it's as simple as that. We must trust people to augment themselves, to transform. And I think we should start asking, why not, instead of why. In Capgemini, we've been looking ahead at these trends as well as the tech trends that influence business decision makers and technology officers. And we've developed a report that is called Technovision. And this year, we identified 5 key trends. And I'll go really quickly to tell you what those are. Small is the new big in AI, and to develop trustworthy and autonomous AI. We need to take it one step at a time, break things down into smaller processes, and figure out how to keep the human in the loop. When we look at cyber and quantum, we had a really fascinating conversation here earlier today. The more data that we have increases our attack surface area of our lives. And AI is, of course, leveraging more data. A change in landscape is coming, and this is going to impact our digital signatures, our encryption, our authentication, and our algorithms. Quantum will be able to break everything we once thought was secure, and we need to get ourselves ready. When we look at batteries, as we power the world, we also need to decarbonize the energy system and explore other chemistries. Moore's Law, it's not dead, but there is a shift in power. It's a strategy, and I heard it earlier today, in semiconductors, growing nearly 20% and creating a real shift in the advanced materials and value chains. On my Perplexity app this week, I already read the headlines that Italy is investing in semiconductors and building a plant worth $5 billion of investment, with the EU backing them up of a $2 billion bond. This is radically going to change the way that businesses operate. In terms of space tech, we're addressing Earth's challenges, staying closer to the low Earth orbit, the LEO, in order to save costs and also to be more efficient. And this is, for the first time, we will be leveraging the lunar orbit since the 1970s, which was the last time that we actually navigated at that level of the orbit. Why is this so important? It's because the impact of digital transformation is huge on the capacity of companies to stay on top. 75% of the SP 500 companies that we saw in 2010 are not going to make the list in 2027 anymore. And as you can see on the top right of this slide, the average lifespan, the average life duration, is now down to 15 years. We see a correlation and in fact a premium for any company which positions itself as a technology provider, and that is why we also claim in our report that any business now needs to become a digital business. Look at the evolution of the top 10 enterprise values in the last 10 years. As you can see, 8 of the 10 are new. Only Microsoft and Apple still make this list, and 9 out of 10 of these companies are tech companies, or companies like Tesla, who position themselves as a digital company. There is more money being invested today in AI startups than in any other type of investment in any other period in history. Last week, Mistral AI announced a €6 billion investment that was made in their company. 6 billion. I remember the days when AI startups, when any startups actually, were hoping for 1 million, 2 million to get their business off the ground. 6 billion in Mistral AI last week. Well, AVV, one of the acclaimed experts in the field of AI, said something beautiful. He said that tech advancements cannot propel humanity forward on its own. For humans to flourish, we need 4 things. We need people, purpose, the planet, and prosperity. I think we're a bit too focused on prosperity. We've over-rotated on capitalism. Social media is deteriorating our trust. And when we start to mistrust where we're heading in the future, it sure makes it a lot harder to let go of the past. The fundamental change when it comes to AI is when ChatGPT broke onto the scene and started to promote Gen AI and AI. It made it accessible to us all. And it's become much more complex. We have the rise of the multi-model, the multi-agent, the multi-model. And I believe in the next year, we're going to see a tremendous boost and a rise in the multi-agent models. But the more artificial we become, the more real we want to be at the intersection of humanity and technology. There's so many examples. We couldn't even spend one day to list them all. But in production, we see computer visioning solutions. In research, new drug discoveries. We had Google on this podium earlier. And in the partnership with AlphaFold and Google DeepMind, for the first time, we're able to get to the DNA molecular structure and really, truly understand that. Less than 10 years ago, Satya Nadella at Microsoft said, through ones and zeros, we will find a cure for cancer. And just last week, Google DeepMind and AlphaFold announced that they can now understand the DNA molecular structure. It's incredible, the pace of this innovation. But let me ask you this. Do you trust AI? How do you know that the AI system is actually outputting correctly? We found a really nice word for it, hallucination. But let's face it, these are actually malfunctions of the large language models. It's when things go wrong. Look specifically for the outputs of programmatic trustworthiness. We need to be able to reduce the bias, to increase data integrity and reliability, and ensure that the outputs are ethically correct. This is a beautiful photo as I'm coming toward the end of this time with you. Earthrise was taken on the Apollo 8 mission. And there was an astronaut, Jim Lovell, who once said, "We went to the moon to discover the moon, but we ended up discovering the Earth." Imagine the perspective that we could have of Earth from space. Since the 1970s, astronauts have been photographing the Earth and documenting the change they could see taking place. Pioneers have explored, and they were willing to break the rules. We need to challenge our thinking and collaborate. Groupthink is a dangerous thing. We need to be able to think differently in order to be able to navigate change, as if our lives are depending on it, because in fact, we are. Well, do you remember those 3 examples I shared at the start of my talk? Here we are in the digital world. You need to manage innovation all the time. Innovation often comes from outside the system. There are pioneers who are willing to explore, realizing that their experiences and their knowledge are never enough. The future is not just an extrapolation of our past. We need to think in different forms and formulas and ask why not. It will probably not take us centuries again before we radically transform ourselves. And in fact, with AI, it's already happening. So I invite you to be a pioneer. You know, an adventure, I often say, is a crisis that we accept. A crisis is an adventure that we reject. When you consider the way you experience the world, let me ask you now again, will you lead the technology to augment humanity for good? What is the paradigm shift that's going to prompt you to create the future you want? Thank you very much.